After losing her mother, Clara was left alone to protect her two young siblings. With no other way out, she begged the most powerful and most unreachable rancher in the region to marry her. To him, it would be nothing more than an arrangement. To her, it was the only chance to keep her family together. But sharing the same roof would give birth to an intense and irresistible bond between two hearts marked by pain. While she learned to see the tenderness hidden behind his coldness, Jameson fought the hardest battle of his life, resisting the only woman capable of tearing down every wall he had built around his own heart. If you love unforgettable romances, with characters who win your heart little by little, subscribe to the channel and leave a like to support our work. And write in the comments where you're watching from. It's a pleasure to get to know a little bit about each of you. The smell of damp earth still clung to the air when Clara Monroe walked out of the cemetery. 30 days had passed since they buried her mother. 30 days since her life had completely fallen apart. Before stepping away from the headstone, though, she had lingered in silence for a few moments, her fingers resting on the cold stone. She had closed her eyes and done the only thing left for her to do. In a silent prayer, she begged God for a miracle, not for herself, but for the two children who depended on her. She asked only for a path, a door she could not yet see, some hand reaching out before it was too late. Then she took a deep breath, wiped away her tears, and moved forward, never imagining that sometimes God begins to answer a prayer the very instant it is spoken. Clara walked down the main street, crossing the heart of small Ashford Crossing, her eyes swollen from crying. At 22, she felt as though she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, and perhaps she truly did. At home, two young siblings waited for her, John, only 8 years old, and Rosie, 5. Two children who now depended on her entirely. Two children someone was trying to take from her hands. Clara pushed open the door of the modest house where they lived. The peeling paint on the walls told the story of years of financial hardship, but it was a home. It was all they had. "Clara?" Rosie ran to her with her little arms open. "You took so long?" Clara picked up the little girl, feeling her heart tighten. How could she explain to a 5-year-old that they might not stay together much longer? "Sorry, sweetheart," she murmured, kissing her sister's forehead. "Where's John?" "Right here." The boy appeared in the kitchen doorway, his eyes red. John tried to be strong, but Clara knew he understood far more about the situation than he let on. Clara sat down on the worn sofa with Rosie in her lap. John came closer and sat beside her, resting his head on her arm. "Clara," he said softly, "is it true that Wayne wants to take us away?" Clara's heart broke a little more. Wayne Hargrove was the children's stepfather, their mother's second husband, a violent, unstable man who had turned the last years of their mother's life into a living hell. "I don't know, John," Clara answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I promise I'll do everything I can so you two stay with me." Even as she said it, though, Clara knew her options were limited. She was young, single, with no stable profession. She worked part-time at the general store, earning just under minimum wage. In the conservative eyes of that small Texas town, she wasn't seen as fit to raise two children. Wayne, on the other hand, was about to get married again, after having abandoned their mother in a fragile moment, months before she passed from that terrible illness. When Lucia's illness worsened, Wayne simply left. He said he wouldn't spend the last months of a dying woman's life taking care of her. He settled in another town, where he started a relationship with another woman even before the marriage had officially ended. Still, he never signed any document giving up responsibility for John and Rosie. He remained, according to the records, their mother's last husband and the only adult who could claim any legal tie to the children. After their mother's death, Wayne suddenly reappeared, not to offer condolences, not to ask how the children were doing. He came saying he intended to bring the family back together. It made no sense. John and Rosie weren't his biological children. There was no inheritance to collect, no land to claim, no financial benefit that would justify such effort. In truth, taking care of two children would mean nothing but more expenses and responsibilities. Only Clara knew the answer, though she preferred not to think about it. Wayne had never been able to stand losing control over people. For years he had controlled her mother through fear, humiliation, and violence. Now that she no longer existed, he had come back to reclaim what, in his twisted mind, still belonged to him, the two children, and the only person who had ever dared to defy him. He wasn't seeking a family, he was seeking submission. In society's eyes, Wayne had a house of his own and a steady job at a ranch. On paper, he looked like the more suitable option. The fact that he beat their mother when he was drunk, the fact that he yelled at the children over anything, the fact that John was terrified of him, none of that mattered to the men in suits who made the official decisions. That night, after the children fell asleep, Clara sat in the kitchen staring at a cup of coffee going cold in her hands. She needed a miracle. She needed something that would completely change her situation in the eyes of the law. That's when she remembered her mother's words. 2 years earlier, when she'd been hospitalized with pneumonia, her mother had gripped Clara's hand tightly and whispered something that, at the time, seemed like fever-induced delirium. If you ever need to, if you're ever in danger, find Jameson Montgomery, just say my name, he'll remember. Clara had thought it was just the words of a sick woman. Her mother always had a flair for the dramatic, but now, desperate, those words came rushing back with full force. Jameson Montgomery. Everyone in the region knew that name. He was the owner of Montgomery Ranch, one of the largest properties in the Texas Hill Country. A powerful man, respected, feared, and, according to the town's gossip, a man who never broke a promise. Clara stayed awake all night, working out a plan that seemed absurd even to her, but it was her only chance. The next morning, after leaving the children at a neighbor's house, Clara caught the only bus heading toward Montgomery Ranch. An hour later, she stood before the imposing gate of the property, her heart pounding like a drum. What stretched out before her was more than a ranch. It was a world apart, suspended in time. The great house rose majestically against the Texas sky. 2 stories of colonial Texan architecture that told stories of generations past. The porch wrapped around the house like open arms, inviting and imposing all at once. White columns held up the red-tiled roof, and the tall windows reflected the golden morning light, like ancient mirrors guarding secrets. But it was what surrounded the house that took her breath away. Perfectly tended gardens spread in every direction, rose beds bursting in shades of red, pink and ivory, lavender that perfumed the air with its soft, hypnotic fragrance. The stone path leading to the main entrance wound between jasmine bushes that seemed to whisper old promises to the wind. Farther off, Clara could see the stables, magnificent structures of dark wood and stone, where thoroughbred horses moved with aristocratic elegance, the soft sound of their neighing mixed with the birdsong, creating a pastoral symphony that seemed to play just for her. But it was the trees that stole the scene. Centuries-old almond trees stood like silent guardians along the entrance, their gnarled, noble branches forming a natural canopy that filtered the sunlight into dancing golden patterns. The leaves whispered ancient secrets, and Clara could imagine how many generations of Montgomerys had walked beneath that very shade. Across the garden, lush fig trees spread out generously, their thick, silvery trunks like columns of a natural temple. Ripe fruit hung heavy among the dark green leaves, and Clara could swear she could taste their sweetness just by looking at them. And then there was the scent. Ah, the scent. It wasn't just an aroma. It was a liquid promise suspended in the air, the sweet perfume of wildflowers growing. Freely in the fields beyond the main house, the warm, earthy smell of the fertile soil that sustained it all, the subtle trace of aged wood and leather drifting from the stables, and beneath it all something more, something that smelled like hope, like possibility, like a future Clara didn't yet dare to fully imagine. The ranch wasn't just beautiful, it was alive, pulsing, a living organism breathing history and tradition. Every stone on the path, every flower in the garden, every ancient tree seemed to say, this place was built to last and to thrive, to protect, to shelter. Clara felt her legs tremble, and it wasn't just from nerves. It was reverence. It was the crushing weight of standing before something far greater than herself. A legacy, an empire, an entire world contained within wrought iron gates. And she, a young woman with nothing but desperation and courage, was about to ask for entry into that world. Clara took a deep breath, filling her lungs with that perfumed air, letting the beauty around her lend her strength. If she was going to beg, let it be in a place worthy of miracles. She rang the bell. A middle-aged man opened the gate, his eyes studying her from head to toe with suspicion. "What do you want?" But Clara wasn't just looking at the man anymore. Her eyes wandered one last time over the gardens, the ancient trees, the house that seemed to be waiting for her, and she felt, deep in her soul, that perhaps fate had brought her exactly where she needed to be. "What do you want?" "I need to speak with Mr. Jameson Montgomery," Clara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "It's urgent." The man hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but—" Clara swallowed hard. "Tell him it's about Lucia Monroe. He'll understand." Her mother's name worked like a magic key. The man stepped away, spoke something into a radio, and minutes later returned with a different expression. "He'll see you," he said, opening the gate fully. "Follow me." Clara walked through the perfectly manicured garden, feeling completely out of place. Her plain clothes stood in stark contrast to the luxury around her. The inside of the house was even more impressive. Antique furniture of fine wood, paintings of Texan landscapes, a chandelier that probably cost more than she earned in 2 years. "He's in the library," the man said, pointing to a dark wooden door. Clara knocked lightly and heard a deep voice, "Come in." When she pushed the door open, Clara felt the air leave her lungs. Jameson Montgomery stood behind a massive desk, and he was even more imposing than she had imagined. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair with a few silver strands at the temples. His brown eyes studied her with an intensity that made her tremble. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms of a man used to working with his hands. There was something wild about him, even dressed like a businessman. "Clara Monroe," he said. It wasn't a question. "Lucia's daughter," she managed to answer, her voice coming out lower than she intended. Jameson gestured toward a chair in front of the desk. "Sit down." Clara obeyed, her hands trembling slightly. Jameson remained standing, watching her in silence, as if trying to understand a decision that didn't yet exist. There was a disconcerting intensity in that steady gaze, one that made her forget, for a moment, even the reason that had brought her there. "I'm sorry for the loss of your mother," he finally said. "Lucia was an extraordinary woman." "Thank you." Clara took a deep breath. The whole way to the ranch, she had rehearsed those words, but standing before him, none of them seemed enough. "Actually, that's why I'm here." Jameson raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Clara told him everything. Her mother's illness, the recent death, the constant fear Wayne had carved into the children, the threat of having them torn from her arms by a man who had never offered them love, only fear. As she spoke, she noticed her own voice waver a few times, but she didn't let the tears interrupt the plea she had carried from the cemetery to that library. Jameson listened in silence, his face unreadable. When she finished, he walked to the window, turning his back to her. "And what exactly do you want from me, Clara?" The moment had come. Clara rose from the chair, her legs shaking. Jameson turned to look at her, and then she did something that shocked the man. For the first time in her life, Clara set aside her pride. Begging before that man was less painful than imagining John and Rosie growing up under the same roof as Wayne. And so, Clara knelt on the library floor. "Please," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "marry me." The silence that followed was deafening. Jameson stood completely still, his eyes wide with shock. "I know how this sounds," she went on, still on her knees. "I know it's madness, but it's my only chance to keep my siblings with me." Jameson took a step toward her. "Get up." She ignored him, her face streaked with tears. "It would only be a marriage of convenience," Clara pressed on, ignoring the command. "Just for a year, until I can secure enough stability to—" "Get up." His voice came out low but firm. She obeyed slowly, but kept talking. "My mother told me I should find you. I don't know what happened so between the two of you in the past, but I know exactly what happened." Jameson cut her off, his voice heavy with an emotion she couldn't quite name. He stepped closer, until they were only inches apart. Clara could smell the masculine scent of him, leather, wood, and something indefinably male. She could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Your mother didn't just save my life," he said quietly. "She saved my soul." Clara held her breath. "But what you're asking—" The sentence died before it ended. Jameson ran a hand along his jaw, as he always did when trying to master his own thoughts. For the first time since Clara had walked into that room, he seemed truly shaken. "It's impossible." "Why?" The question came out as a desperate whisper. Jameson studied her face for a long moment. Clara saw conflict in his eyes, saw old memories being revived. Because marriage isn't a game, Clara, not even a marriage of convenience. I understand the rules, she said quickly. There wouldn't be. I wouldn't expect anything from you, it would only be on paper. Jameson let out a bitter laugh. You have no idea what you're asking for. Then explain it to me. He stepped away from her, running his hands through his hair. I'm a 40-year-old man, Clara, he said, his voice controlled, with a legacy of honor to uphold, responsibilities you can't begin to imagine. I'm a man used to living alone. My whole life functions because there's order, discipline, rules. A marriage changes all of that. And I'm a desperate woman who could lose the only family I have left, she replied, her voice gaining strength. My siblings would grow up in the house of a man who was cruel and cowardly to my mother. John has nightmares about him every night. Jameson stopped pacing, his jaw tight. Besides, Clara continued, it wouldn't be forever. 1 year, Mr. Montgomery. 12 months for me to prove I can take care of them, and then… She took a deep breath. Then we'll divorce, and each of us goes our own way. Jameson was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the land stretching to the horizon. He seemed to be weighing an old promise against his own peace of mind. When he finally turned to face her, there was resignation in his eyes. Clara waited, her heart in her throat, knowing her whole life depended on his answer. On one condition, he said, his voice deep and firm. Clara felt a spark of hope. Anything. If I agree, there will be no second chances. No changing your mind. You would live here in this house as my wife in the eyes of everyone. Your life would have to adjust to the ranch's rules and keep up the appearance of a real marriage. Clara swallowed hard. I understand. No. Jameson took a step toward her. You don't understand. I'm not an easy man to live with, Clara. I have rules. I have expectations. And I don't tolerate disrespect. There was something dangerous in his voice. Something that made every instinct in Clara scream at her to run. But then she thought of John crying at night. She thought of Rosie asking when Mama was coming back. I accept your conditions, she said, lifting her chin. Jameson studied her for another moment, as if searching for signs that she would change her mind. Very well, he finally said. We'll marry next week. Clara felt her legs weaken with relief. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much, Mr. Montgomery. Don't thank me yet, Jameson said, his voice carrying a warning she didn't fully understand. You might find out you've asked for more than you can bear. He walked to the desk and pulled out a business card. Here's my lawyer's number. He'll handle all the legal details. And Clara, she looked at him, still trembling inside. From now on, your life is under my rules. Don't forget that. Clara nodded and walked out of the library on shaky legs, holding the card, as if it were a treasure. It was only when she reached the ranch gate that she realized she had just made a deal with the devil. In that instant, she realized she might have traded one prison for another, or something even worse. A week later, Clara was back at Montgomery Ranch. This time, she didn't arrive as a desperate visitor. She arrived as the future wife of the most powerful rancher in the region, and that terrified her more than it should have. The man who greeted her at the gate was the same one from her first visit, but now he treated her with a reverence that left her uneasy. Miss Monroe, he said, tipping his hat, the boss is waiting for you in the office. Clara nodded, trying to look more confident than she felt. She wore her best outfit, a navy blue dress that had belonged to her mother. It was simple but well cut and made her look older. She needed all the maturity she could fake. Jameson's office was in an annex of the main house, a more rustic setting with dark wood walls and the smell of leather and paper. This was where he handled the ranch's business. This was where she would seal her fate. Jameson sat behind a massive desk, going over some documents. When she walked in, he looked up, and Clara felt the same impact as the first time. There was something in those brown eyes that made her feel small and exposed. Sit down, he said, gesturing to a chair across the desk. Clara obeyed, setting her purse on her lap and folding her hands over it. Jameson studied her for a moment, as if trying to decipher a puzzle. Did you change your mind? He finally asked. No, Clara answered quickly, perhaps too quickly. And you? Jameson rested his elbows on the desk, lacing his fingers together. I spent the whole week trying to find a reason to refuse your request. He paused, almost imperceptibly. Clara's heart raced. I found that any reason would be smaller than the debt I owe your mother. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Jameson stood and walked to the window overlooking the corrals. Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, in the way he held his hands behind his back. "Your mother saved my life, Clara," he said without turning, "and I'm not speaking metaphorically." Clara waited, sensing he was about to reveal something important. "About 20 years ago, I was a different man," Jameson continued. "Younger, more of a fool. I thought I could solve everything with my fists." He turned to face her, and Clara saw an old shadow in his eyes. "One night, I got into an ugly fight in town. 3 men cornered me in an alley. They wanted to teach me a lesson about respect." Jameson let out a bitter laugh. "They nearly succeeded." Clara held her breath. "It was your mother who found me, in a terrible state, left to my own fate, nearly dead, discarded like a wounded animal." He sat back down. "She could have kept walking, and no one would ever have known. Instead, she struggled to carry me to the clinic, paid for my medical care with her own money, which was already scarce." "Mama never told me that," Clara whispered. "Lucia was discreet. She didn't just save my life that night, she changed who I was. She made me look at the man I was becoming, and made me promise I would never again waste the second chance God had given me. She made me promise I would become a better man." Jameson looked straight at her. "She never asked for anything, never demanded anything in return for her act of kindness, and that's why I accept your proposal. Not because of you or your desperate request, but because of the debt I owe her." The words should have wounded Clara, and in a way they did. That man seemed to have no compassion for anyone else's suffering, but thinking it over, her proposal was, at the very least, unusual, so she swallowed the pain and kept her head held high. "I understand," she said, "but I accept your terms regardless of the reason." Jameson nodded. "If we're going to do this, I need you to understand something, so let's lay out the rules." He pulled out a sheet of paper and a pen. Clara realized he had already thought everything through. "First," he said, writing, "the marriage will last exactly 1 year, not a single day more." Clara nodded. "Second, you and your siblings will live here on the ranch. They'll have education, food, everything they need, but you'll be responsible for their discipline and for keeping them out of trouble. I don't know how to live in chaos, Clara." "Of course." "Third, this will be a marriage on paper only. You'll have your own room, your own privacy. There will be no intimacy between us." Clara felt her face heat up but kept her voice steady. "Understood." Jameson studied her. "Are you sure? You're young, Clara. A year is a long time for a woman your age to go without companionship." "I can handle it," she answered, lifting her chin. "Fourth, in public we'll act as a normal couple. You'll be introduced as my wife and will keep up appearances." Clara nodded again. "Fifth, you won't work outside the ranch. I'm a wealthy man. I don't want people gossiping about my wife needing to work to support herself." That condition bothered her, but Clara knew she wasn't in a position to negotiate. Playing a convincing part was necessary. "Sixth," Jameson went on, "you won't get involved with other men, not even intimate conversations. I'm a territorial man by nature, and I won't tolerate disrespect, especially from the woman everyone believes to be my wife." "I would never do that," Clara said, genuinely offended. He simply continued listing his rules, his voice grave. "Seventh, if either of us wants to break the agreement before the term ends, we may do so, but only with 30 days' notice." Jameson finished writing and pushed the paper toward her. "Read it. If you agree, sign it. But I'll point out that my word is worth more than any signature. I expect the same from you." Clara picked up the document with slightly trembling hands. The rules were all there, written in Jameson's firm handwriting. It looked more like a business contract than a marriage agreement. Perhaps that's exactly what it was. "And what if I fall in love?" she asked suddenly, surprising them both. Jameson slowly raised his eyes from the contract. For the first time in the entire conversation, he seemed to have no ready answer. "A year is a long time," Clara went on. "If I fall in love with you, what happens?" The silence that followed was tense. Jameson watched her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "That would be your problem, not mine," he finally said. The coldness in his voice hit her like a slap, but Clara didn't back down. Instead, she gathered what little courage she had left and shifted the focus of her question. "And what if you fall in love?" "With me, Mr. Montgomery?" Jameson let out a humorless laugh. That's not going to happen. How can you be so sure? Because I don't allow myself to be ruled by fleeting feelings. Clara studied him for a few seconds. There was something in the way he said it that made her realize Jameson had fallen in love before, and he had been hurt because of it. Very well, she said, picking up the pen. I accept all the conditions. She signed the document carefully. Jameson took the paper back and signed as well. There, he said, we have a deal. Clara looked at the two signatures on the paper. It seemed so cold, so impersonal, but it was her only chance to keep her siblings safe. When will the wedding be? She asked. Next Friday, a civil ceremony at the town clerk's office. Only the necessary witnesses. No party, no celebration. And after. After, you bring your siblings here. I've already had rooms prepared for you all. Jameson stood, signaling the meeting had ended. Clara stood as well, tucking her copy of the agreement into her purse. Mr. Montgomery, she said when she reached the door. He looked at her, waiting. Thank you. Jameson nodded. Don't thank me yet, Clara. We still don't know if you'll regret this. Clara left the office with a mixture of relief and fear in her chest. She had gotten what she wanted. Her siblings would be safe. She would have a full year to prove she could take care of them. As she crossed the garden, toward the exit, Clara realized she had won exactly what she had begged for, a safe home for her siblings. What she still couldn't understand was why that man, so cold, so reserved and seemingly so unreachable, kept occupying her thoughts long after their conversation had ended. There was a strange restlessness in that feeling, something she couldn't yet name. Perhaps it was only gratitude, perhaps it was admiration, or perhaps she was about to discover that some agreements change, far more than the course of a life. And so, Clara wondered whether the contract that promised to protect her would end up demanding exactly the one thing she had never imagined putting at risk, her own heart. Friday came too fast for Clara. On the morning of the wedding, she woke up with a knot in her stomach that didn't go away even after coffee. John and Rosie noticed her tension, but didn't ask questions. They still didn't know about the marriage. Clara had decided to tell them only after everything was settled. It was better that way. Fewer complicated explanations for two children who had already been through enough trauma. At 9 in the morning, she stood before the Ashford Crossing county clerk's office, wearing the same navy blue dress from her meeting with Jameson. She didn't have another one suitable enough for the occasion. Jameson arrived 5 minutes later, driving a black pickup truck. He wore a white dress shirt and dark pants, sharp and impeccable. He got out of the vehicle and walked over to her. Clara noticed that a few people on the street had stopped to watch. News of Jameson Montgomery's wedding had already spread through the small town. Ready? He asked, offering his arm like a perfect gentleman. Appearances, just appearances, she thought. Clara nodded and walked with him to the clerk's office entrance. She could feel the curious stares burning into her back. The clerk greeted them with a professional smile, but Clara caught the glint of curiosity in his eyes. This marriage would be the talk of the gossip circles for weeks. Did you bring witnesses? The man asked. I brought 2, Jameson answered, gesturing to 2 men who had walked in behind them. Clara recognized them as ranch employees, men Jameson trusted, judging by their clean uniforms and the respectful way they treated him. And you, ma'am? The clerk turned to Clara. She felt her face heat up. I don't have any witnesses. The silence that followed was awkward. Jameson looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. My witnesses can serve for both of us, he finally said. Of course, the clerk agreed quickly. Let's begin then. The ceremony lasted less than 15 minutes. Clara heard the clerk's words as if underwater. Everything felt unreal, distant. When the time came to say, I do, her voice came out quieter than she intended. Jameson signed the papers with the same coldness he'd used to sign a business contract, and then it was done. They were married. The clerk congratulated them with forced enthusiasm. The witnesses signed the documents. Jameson paid the fees, and Clara Monroe officially became Clara Montgomery. Outside the clerk's office, Jameson turned to her. I need to take care of a few things in town, he said. You can head home in my truck. Elijah will drive. He gestured toward one of the men who had served as a witness. And you? Clara asked. I'll come later. I need to stop by the bank and talk to my lawyer about the guardianship papers for your siblings. Clara nodded, trying not to show the relief she felt. She still wasn't ready for constant closeness with Jameson. That man unsettled her in a way she didn't understand. The ride to the ranch was silent. Elijah Boone drove with focus, and Clara got lost in her own thoughts. She was married to a man she barely knew, a man who had made it clear he felt nothing for her. When they arrived at the ranch, Clara climbed out of the truck on shaky legs. Elijah turned the vehicle around and drove off, leaving her alone in front of the big house. The house that was now her home too. The front door opened before she could knock. A middle-aged woman appeared, smiling warmly. "Mrs. Montgomery," she said. "I'm Miss Dolores, the housekeeper. Welcome to your new home." Clara forced a smile. "Thank you. The boss asked me to show you your quarters and explain the household routine," Miss Dolores continued. "If you'd like to follow me." Clara followed the woman through the house's hallways. It was even bigger inside than it looked from outside. Enormous rooms, antique furniture, Persian rugs on the floor, wealth in every detail. "This will be your suite," Miss Dolores said, opening a door on the second floor. Clara walked in, and her jaw dropped. The room was 3 times bigger than the living room in her old house. A king-size bed dominated the center, covered in a silk blue comforter. There was a reading chair by the window, a wardrobe that took up an entire wall, and a door leading to a private bathroom. "The boss's room is across the hall," Miss Dolores explained. "But he asked me to make it clear that you have complete privacy here." Clara nodded, trying to take it all in. "The other staff are Anita May, who runs the kitchen, Caleb Tucker, who tends the gardens, and 3 more men who work with the animals, the orchard, and the crops," the housekeeper continued. "They all know you're the new lady of the house and will treat you with the respect you're due." "Thank you," Clara murmured. "Is there anything else you need to know right now?" Clara looked around the luxurious room. Everything was perfect, elegant, expensive, and completely foreign to her. "Where are the children's rooms?" she asked. Miss Dolores smiled. The boss had 2 rooms prepared on the ground floor near the kitchen. He thought it would be more practical for the children. She took Clara to see the rooms. They were smaller than the master suite, but still bigger than any room John and Rosie had ever had. Each had its own bed, a dresser, a small desk for schoolwork. "When do they arrive?" Miss Dolores asked. "Tomorrow," Clara answered. "I'll pick them up in the morning." "Wonderful. The house gets livelier with children around." Miss Dolores withdrew, leaving Clara alone to explore her new reality. She walked through the rooms, trying to get used to the idea that this was her home now, at least for the time being. Late in the afternoon, she heard the sound of a truck pulling up. Through the living room window, she saw Jameson getting out of the vehicle. Clara hurried down the stairs, meeting him in the entrance hall. "How was your first day as lady of the house?" he asked, taking off his hat. There was something in the question that sounded like a challenge. "Fine," Clara answered. "Miss Dolores showed me everything." "Good." Jameson hung his hat on the coat rack. "Dinner is at 7. I expect you to join me." It wasn't an invitation. It was an order in disguise. "Of course," Clara said. Jameson climbed the stairs, presumably heading to his room. Clara stood in the hall, listening to his footsteps fade away. The house fell silent again. At 7 o'clock sharp, Clara came down for dinner, wearing a simple skirt and blouse, trying to find the balance between casual and respectful. Jameson was already seated at the head of the long dining room table. He had changed clothes and now wore a dark, long-sleeved shirt. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair on his right. Anita May, the cook, served the meal. A soup starter, roast beef with potatoes, salad, all delicious and beautifully presented. But the silence between them made every bite hard to swallow. "Tomorrow I'll pick up John and Rosie," Clara finally said, trying to break the ice. "Good. Do you need help?" "No, thank you. We don't have much." Jameson nodded and went back to eating. Clara tried once more. "The house is beautiful. It must have a lot of history. It was built by my grandfather." Jameson answered without lifting his eyes from his plate. "It's over 60 years old. It must be special to you." "It is." The dry, final tone of his answer made it clear he didn't want to expand on the subject. Clara gave up trying to make conversation. After dinner, Jameson retreated to his office. Clara went up to her room feeling more alone than ever. She lay down on the enormous bed and stared at the high ceiling. She had been married for less than 12 hours and already knew it would be a very, very long year. Jameson treated her like an inconvenient guest, polite but distant, fulfilling the terms of the agreement, but nothing beyond that. Clara closed her eyes and tried to remember why she had done this. John, Rosie, their safety. For her siblings' sake, she would endure anything, even a loveless marriage to a stranger who made her feel invisible. On Saturday morning, Clara went to pick up her siblings. The house where they had grown up seemed even smaller than she remembered. A few days' absence had been enough to make everything there feel like it belonged to a previous life. John and Rosie waited for her with 2 small suitcases containing all their belongings. The neighbor, Donna Carmen, had looked after them over the past few days and now watched them leave with tears in her eyes. "Take good care of them," the woman said, hugging Clara. "I will," Clara promised, trying to sound more confident than she felt. On the way to the ranch, the children stayed quiet. John stared out the bus window with an expression too serious for his 8 years. Rosie clung to the stuffed bear that had been her only comfort since their mother's death. "Clara," John finally said, "why are we going to live on a ranch?" Clara took a deep breath. It was time to tell the truth, at least part of it. "Because I got married." John turned to her, eyes wide. "Married?" Rosie asked, lifting her head from the teddy bear. "To who?" "To Mr. Jameson Montgomery. He owns a big ranch. You're going to like it there." John frowned. "But you weren't even dating anyone." "Sometimes things happen fast," Clara said, hating that she had to lie to them. "Is he nice?" Rosie asked. Clara hesitated. How could she explain that her husband was practically a cold, brusque stranger? "He's a good man," she finally said, "but he's serious. So you two need to behave." When they arrived at the ranch, Jameson was waiting on the porch. Clara noticed he had dressed up more than usual, a light dress shirt, combed hair, formal posture. John and Rosie hid behind Clara as they got out of the car. "Are these the children?" Jameson asked, walking closer. "Yes, John and Rosie. Come say hello to Mr. Montgomery." John stepped forward and held out his hand, the way Clara had taught him. "Nice to meet you, sir." Jameson shook the small hand carefully. "Nice to meet you, John. I hope you like it here." Rosie stayed hidden, behind her sister, only peeking at Jameson from behind the teddy bear. "She's shy," Clara explained. "I understand." Jameson knelt down to be at the girl's eye level. "Hi, Rosie. That's a nice bear you've got." "Thank you," Rosie whispered, but didn't come out from behind Clara. Jameson stood back up and Clara caught a shadow of something in his eyes, maybe frustration or disappointment. "Miss Dolores will show them their rooms," he said. "You all must be tired from the trip." Over. The following days, Clara tried to establish a routine. She woke up early, made the children's breakfast, then busied herself with small tasks around the house. Miss Dolores was kind, but made it clear that the kitchen was Anita May's territory. The other staff treated her with respect, but kept their distance. Clara felt like a guest in her own home. Jameson left early to handle ranch business and only returned in the late afternoon. During the day, Clara sometimes heard him through the window, talking with the staff or riding on horseback inspecting the pastures. He seemed completely in his element out there, confident, in control, so different from the tense man who ate dinner with her in silence every night. John adapted better than Rosie. The boy was naturally curious and soon struck up a friendship with Caleb Tucker, the gardener. He spent his mornings following the man around the garden, asking 1,000 questions about plants and animals. Rosie, on the other hand, stayed glued to Clara. She didn't want to play alone, didn't want to talk to strangers, and cried every night before falling asleep. "She's still processing losing our mother," Clara explained to Jameson during one of the few attempts at conversation they'd had. "It'll pass." Jameson only nodded, but Clara noticed he watched Rosie with a strange expression whenever the girl started crying. The first week passed without major incidents. The second one started with problems. On Monday morning, Clara came down for coffee and found Jameson in the kitchen, talking quietly with Miss Dolores, while she packed fig jam she had just made into storage jars. Both stopped talking when they saw her. "Good morning," Clara said, trying to ignore the feeling that she was interrupting something important. "Good morning," Jameson answered curtly. Miss Dolores murmured a greeting and quickly left the kitchen. Clara poured herself some coffee, immediately noticing the silent tension hanging over the table. "Did something happen?" she asked. Jameson raised his eyes from the newspaper. "Anita May mentioned you were in the kitchen last night." Clara frowned. Rosie woke up scared. "I made a bit of hot chocolate and some pancakes to calm her down. I didn't want to wake anyone." Jameson stayed silent for a few seconds before answering. Anita May has run that kitchen for over 20 years. She knows every staff member, every routine of this house. It's a space she manages with a great deal of pride, and I make it a point to respect that. Clara watched him, not understanding. I didn't touch anything I didn't need to. I know. The answer came immediately, but his tone remained firm. I'm not saying you did anything wrong on purpose. I'm saying that in this house people don't step into each other's work. Anita May would have made anything you asked for, even in the middle of the night. Clara slowly set down her cup. That's exactly why I didn't want to wake her. She already works all day long. It seemed kinder to let her rest. For a moment, Jameson lost his train of thought. There was such a natural gentleness in the way Clara thought of others first, that something inside him wavered. It was the same compassion that had driven her through her own grief to protect her siblings, and maybe that was exactly what unsettled him, because every small gesture of hers found a crack in the walls he had spent years building. But instead of acknowledging that uncomfortable feeling, he put back on the stern expression he knew so well. Even so, there are rules. Clara took a deep breath. Rules should exist to serve people, Jameson, not the other way around. His gaze met hers. For a moment, neither of them looked away. There was something dangerously intimate in that silent standoff. Her firmness stirred an admiration Jameson didn't want to feel, and the closeness made his eyes linger longer than they should have on her serene face, on the loose strands of her hair, on the softness of her lips. He stepped back before she could notice. This house works because everyone knows their place. Clara stood up as well. Last night, I wasn't trying to change how your house runs. I was just trying to comfort a 5-year-old girl crying because she misses her mother. The words hung between them. Jameson clenched his jaw, trying to control his irritation. He knew she was right, but admitting that meant accepting that maybe his rules weren't enough to heal every wound, and he wasn't ready for that discovery yet. Next time, he said, quieter than before, ask Anita May. Clara held his gaze for another moment. Understood. Her voice came out calm, but there was a quiet sadness in it. I won't go back into the kitchen without asking permission. She turned and left the room. Jameson stood still, following her with his eyes until she disappeared down the hallway. Only then did he realize the argument hadn't bothered him because Clara had used the kitchen. It bothered him because every time she challenged his certainties, she knocked down another piece of the carefully controlled life he had spent years building, and Jameson Montgomery was no longer sure he wanted to stop her. Even before lunch, Clara sought out Anita May and Miss Dolores to apologize to them personally. With the same gentleness she showed everyone around her, she explained that she'd never meant to intrude on anyone's space, and thanked them both for the care and dedication they'd shown the house for so many years. Anita May hugged her warmly before she'd even finished speaking. The humble sincerity of that gesture reached Jameson's ears and left him quiet. He hadn't expected Clara to be proud enough to argue, nor generous enough to acknowledge, with such grace, what could have simply been a misunderstanding. For the first time since the argument, he felt the uncomfortable weight of having been harsher than she deserved. Later, Clara was in the garden with the children when she saw Jameson talking with Caleb near the corral. He gestured as he spoke, and Clara noticed he was looking their way. After the conversation, Caleb walked over to Clara. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said, tipping his hat, "the boss asked me to let you know the children shouldn't play near the animals without supervision." Clara looked at John, who was standing a safe distance from the horses, just watching. "He was only watching," she said. "Yes, ma'am, but the boss just wants to avoid accidents." Clara nodded, but inside she was seething with irritation. Jameson was setting rules for everything, as if she and the children were intruders who needed to be controlled. That night at dinner, the tension between them felt like a taut bowstring. "How was your day?" Clara asked, trying to keep things civil. "Productive," Jameson answered. "The children are enjoying the ranch." "That's good." Clara tried once more. "John is very interested in the animals. Maybe you could show him the horses sometime." Jameson looked directly at her for the first time in the conversation. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Children and large animals don't mix, even with proper supervision." His voice came out final. "I said no." Clara set her fork down on her plate harder than necessary. "Of course. It's your ranch. Your rules." Jameson caught the irony in her voice. "Exactly." Clara finished eating in silence, but inside she made a decision. If Jameson wanted to treat her like an inconvenient guest, she would act like one. polite but distant, present but not involved, fulfilling the terms of the contract but nothing more. When she went up to her room that night, Clara looked out the window and saw Jameson on the porch, smoking a cigarette. He was looking toward the mountains, but Clara had the feeling his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. Maybe he too was realizing that a year was a very long time for two people who clearly couldn't live in harmony. Clara closed the curtains and got ready for bed, knowing the next day would bring new clashes, and that for now she and Jameson were strangers living under the same roof, bound only by a contract and mutual need, nothing more. A few days later, Clara was playing with Rosie in the garden when she heard the sound of a car pulling up. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Jameson hadn't yet come back from the pastures. Clara frowned, unsettled by the unexpected visit. When the car stopped in front of the house, Clara felt her blood run cold. It was Wayne Hargrove. Their stepfather got out of the old car with his usual arrogance. Even from a distance, Clara could catch the smell of alcohol that always followed him. "Clara, who's that man coming?" Rosie asked, hiding behind her skirt. "Nobody important," Clara answered quickly, picking the girl up. "Let's go inside." But it was too late. Wayne had already seen the children. "Hey, John, Rosie," he shouted, walking toward them. "Come say hi to your stepdad." John appeared from behind a tree where he'd been playing, and Clara saw fear spread across the boy's face. "Clara, I want to go inside," Rosie whispered in her ear. "We're going, sweetheart," Clara murmured, but Wayne was already too close. "Well, look at that," he said, stopping a few yards away. "The famous Clara who turned into a fine lady." Clara stared him down, trying to stay calm. "What do you want here, Wayne?" "I came to pick up the kids, obviously." "They were your stepchildren," Clara corrected, "and you lost any claim to them the moment you chose the bottle over taking care of them." Wayne's face darkened. "You can't stop me from seeing my kids." "I can, and I will." Wayne took a step forward and Clara instinctively backed away, still holding Rosie. John moved closer to her, gripping her free hand. "You think just because you married some rich rancher you can boss me around now?" Wayne laughed bitterly. "You're still the same scared little girl you always were." "Maybe," Clara said, lifting her chin. "But now that little girl has protection." "Protection?" Wayne looked around the empty ranch. "I don't see any protection here. Just you and the kids." He took another step forward and Clara realized he was drunker than she'd first thought. "You know what we're going to do?" he said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "You're going to get your things and come with me, right now." "No," Clara said firmly. "Excuse me." "I said, no, Wayne. The kids stay here." The man moved closer, and Clara could see the anger building in his eyes. "You forgot who you're talking to, girl." Wayne raised his hand, and Clara braced for the blow. She knew was coming. She'd seen that gesture too many times when he used to hit their mother, but the blow never landed. "Get your hand away from my wife." Jameson's voice cut through the air like a blade. Clara turned and saw him walking toward them, coming from the stables. There was something different about him, something dangerous. His eyes were cold as ice, but underneath there was a contained fury that made Clara shiver. It wasn't just fear of what might happen. For the first time, she registered the quiet strength of that man closing the distance toward her, and a strange wave of warmth swept through her chest before she could even understand why. Wayne slowly lowered his hand and turned to face Jameson. "You must be the husband," he said, trying to sound defiant. "Jameson Montgomery," Jameson answered, stopping beside Clara. The heat of his body reached her before their shoulders even nearly touched. It was a subtle closeness, but enough for Clara to catch the clean scent of leather, wood, and wind that always seemed to follow him. Her heart raced in a way she hadn't expected, though she kept her face composed. "And you are?" "Wayne Hargrove, the kid's stepfather." He pointed at John and Rosie. "I came to get them." Jameson looked at the children, who were visibly terrified. Then he turned his eyes back to Wayne. "The children live here now," Jameson said, his voice low but firm. "This is temporary," Wayne shot back. "They're coming back with me." "No, they're not." The sentence came out so final that even Clara was startled. Wayne blinked. "What do you mean, no?" "You heard me fine. No." Jameson took a step forward, and Clara noticed he was at least 6 inches taller than Wayne. She studied his firm profile. His jaw was clenched, his shoulders still, his voice perfectly controlled. The calmer he seemed, the more dangerous he became. She couldn't look away. "The children stay here," his voice rang out, solemn as thunder on a stormy day. "You can't stop me from taking my kids." "Oh, I can and I will." Jameson crossed his arms, and the tension in the air grew thick. "Listen here, rancher," Wayne said, trying to sound threatening. "You don't know who you're messing with." Jameson let out a low, humorless laugh. "Actually, you're the one who doesn't know." He stepped closer to Wayne, who instinctively backed off. "You're on my property, threatening my wife, and trying to intimidate two innocent children. That's already reason enough for me to throw you off my land." "You can't." "Oh, I can." Jameson cut him off. "This is my land, my rules, and my decision is that you leave. Now." Wayne looked around as if searching for backup, but they were alone and he clearly realized he was outmatched. "This isn't over," he said, backing toward the car. "You're right about that," Jameson agreed. "Next time you show up here uninvited, you won't be walking away." The veiled threat in Jameson's voice made Wayne swallow hard. "You're going to regret getting involved in this," he said, opening the car door. "I'm shaking in my boots," Jameson replied sarcastically. Wayne got in the car and started the engine. Before driving off, he rolled down the window. "This isn't over, Clara," he shouted. "One day you'll be without your protection and I'll be waiting." The car peeled out, kicking up a cloud of dust. The silence that followed was broken only by Rosie's quiet crying still in Clara's arms. "It's over," Clara whispered to the girl. "He's gone now." Jameson knelt in front of John, who was pale and trembling. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice much gentler now. John nodded, but Clara could see the boy was shaken. Is he going to come back?" John asked. Jameson looked directly into the boy's eyes. "Not while I'm here." There was a promise in his voice that made Clara feel something strange in her chest. "Why did you defend us?" she asked once John had wandered off to play again. Jameson looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because you're my wife," he said simply, "and they're under my protection now. But even though it's just a marriage of convenience, convenient or not, a man protects his family." The word family lingered in the air between them. Clara noticed that Jameson seemed to catch what he'd said, because he quickly looked away. "I'll talk to my lawyer about a protective order," he said, changing the subject. "That man can't keep threatening you." "Thank you," Clara said softly. Jameson nodded and started to walk away, but Clara called after him. "Jameson." He turned. "Thank you," she repeated. "Really, for protecting us." Jameson held her gaze for a brief moment. The silence between them seemed to gain weight. Few words had been spoken, but there was an unexpected intensity in that steady look, as if both of them sensed something beginning to shift, without either being willing to admit it. For a moment something crossed his face, something Clara couldn't fully name, but which left her feeling warm inside. "No need to thank me," he finally said, but there was something different in his voice, less cold, more human. That night at dinner, the usual silence was broken by John. "Jameson," the boy said suddenly, "you're really strong, aren't you?" Jameson stopped eating and looked at the boy. "Why do you ask?" "Because you weren't scared of Wayne, and he's really scary." "Sometimes it's not about not being scared," Jameson answered carefully. "It's about doing what's right, even when you're scared." John nodded, as if the explanation made complete sense to him. Clara watched the exchange between them, and when Jameson glanced her way, their eyes met. This time neither of them looked away right away. Time seemed to slow for a brief instant. Clara felt her breath catch in her chest, without understanding why, while something subtly warmer passed through his gaze before Jameson finally broke the contact. But Clara noticed that he had felt the connection too. She sensed something had changed that afternoon. Jameson was still distant, still cold most of the time, but for the first time since they'd married, Clara had glimpsed the man behind the facade, and for the first time, she felt truly safe beside him, even if it was only part of the arrangement, even if it meant nothing romantic. Jameson had put himself between her and danger, and that was more than any man had ever done for her in her life. 3 days after the incident with Wayne, Jameson appeared on the porch where Clara was reclined, reading a Nicholas Sparks novel. "Put on something suitable for riding," he said, without preamble. Clara looked up from the book. "Excuse me? You're going to learn to ride. If you're going to live on a ranch, you need to know how to handle horses." "That's not necessary," Clara said quickly, remembering that her time there was only temporary. "I don't need to." "Yes, you do." His voice left no room for argument. On a property this size, knowing how to ride isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Clara hesitated. The truth was, horses made her nervous. They were big, unpredictable, and she'd never gone near one without feeling afraid. "I don't have proper clothes," she tried. "Mr. Loris already took care of that." Jameson gestured to a package he was holding. "Be ready in half an hour." He walked off before she could protest further. Clara opened the package and found riding pants, leather boots, and a sturdy shirt. Everything fit perfectly. Mr. Loris really had thought of everything. Half an hour later, Clara appeared in front of the stables, trying to steady her nerves, wearing the riding clothes Mr. Loris had set out. Jameson looked up, just to confirm she'd arrived, and froze for a fraction of a second. The simple clothes seemed to have been made for her. The boots traced the natural elegance of her movements, while a few golden strands caught the wind, lit by the morning sun. He looked away immediately. There was no reason at all to notice his own wife's beauty. After all, this whole thing was a farce. Still, he realized he'd already done it before he could stop himself. Jameson pushed the unsettling thoughts aside and walked over to her, leading two horses by their reins. One was an imposing black stallion, which Clara assumed was his. The other was a smaller brown mare with gentle eyes. "This is Luna," Jameson said, stroking the mare's neck. "She's calm and patient, perfect for beginners." Clara approached slowly, reaching out to touch the animal. Luna snorted softly and nuzzled her muzzle into Clara's palm. "She likes you," Jameson observed, and there was something almost like surprise in his voice. "How do you know?" "Horses sense a person's character. Luna's only affectionate with people who deserve it." Clara felt something warm stir in her chest at the comment, but had no time to dwell on it. "First, I'll teach you how to approach her properly," Jameson said, positioning himself beside Clara. "Always from the side, never from behind. Slow movements, calm voice." He placed his hand over Clara's, guiding her to stroke Luna's neck. His touch was warm and firm. Clara felt a shiver run down her arm, a subtle electric current that caught her off guard. The gesture should have been simple, just an instruction, but the delicate warmth of Clara's skin also broke through the composure he'd maintained for weeks. Jameson clenched his jaw. It was just a touch. It needed to stay just that. "Like this," he murmured, his voice lower than usual. Clara was acutely aware of how close he was. She could feel the heat radiating off his body, the smell of soap and something indefinably masculine that belonged only to him. Jameson's hand stayed over hers a moment longer than necessary. "Now, mounting up," Jameson said, pulling away abruptly. He taught Clara how to put her foot in the stirrup, how to push herself up, how to hold the reins. His hands guided her through the movements, touching her waist to help her find her balance, adjusting her legs into the right position. Every touch was professional, necessary, but Clara felt each one like fire against her skin. His fingers lingered a fraction of a second too long at the curve of her waist. His breath brushed against her neck as he leaned in to adjust the stirrup. Realizing he was getting tangled up in these new sensations, Jameson pulled his hand back almost immediately, faster than necessary. Not because the touch was improper, but because lingering even one more second felt like a dangerously tempting idea. "Relax," Jameson said, noticing her tension. "Luna can feel when you're nervous." "I'm trying," Clara answered, gripping the reins too tightly. Jameson mounted his own horse with a fluidity that impressed Clara. He seemed born for the saddle, completely in his element, powerful and controlled. "Let's go slow," he said, "just a light touch on her sides. She knows what to do." They rode out of the stables at a slow walk. Clara was tense, but Luna really was patient, responding to the subtlest cues. Gradually, Clara began to relax. There was something freeing about being up so high, seeing the ranch from a different perspective. "Better?" Jameson asked, riding alongside her. "Better," Clara admitted, risking a small smile. Jameson watched her for a moment, and Clara thought she saw something like approval in his eyes, maybe even admiration. They rode across the fields in comfortable silence. Clara was starting to feel confident when Luna misstepped in a dip in the ground. The mare stumbled, and Clara felt her balance slip away. She tilted dangerously to one side, the reins sliding from her hands. Within seconds, Jameson was beside her, leaping off his own horse while it was still moving. His arms closed around Clara's waist, pulling her out of the saddle before she could fall. The motion spun them around and Clara found herself pressed against Jameson's chest, her feet not touching the ground. His arms held her firmly, one hand at her back, the other at the base of her waist, fingers spread against the curve of her hips. For a moment they stayed like that. Clara could feel Jameson's heart pounding against her chest. She could feel his breath in her hair, warm and uneven. The masculine scent she now associated only with him, aftershave, leather and something deeper. Their faces were inches apart. Clara could make out the details of Jameson's eyes, the small lines around them that appeared when he concentrated, and she saw something else, something that made her stomach tighten in a not unpleasant way. There was something new in that look. It wasn't just concern. It wasn't just relief. It was restrained desire. It was a silent acknowledgement that neither of them was ready. To her face, Jameson was looking at her in a way she'd never seen before, as if she were something he wanted but shouldn't want, as if he were fighting an internal battle he was losing. Both their breaths came fast. Clara felt her lips tingle, as if her body knew something her mind was still processing. Jameson's eyes dropped to her lips and Clara was certain he was going to kiss her. The distance between them was small enough to make any movement irreversible. Part of him wanted to close those last few inches. The other part sharply reminded him of every reason he should never do it. But then he seemed to catch himself. Abruptly, he set her down on the ground and stepped back, as if she burned. He had to. If he stayed close to her a few seconds longer, he feared he'd completely forget the discipline that had guided his life for so many years. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. "No," Clara managed to say, still dazed by the sudden closeness and the equally sudden retreat. "I'm fine." Jameson nodded and went to check on Luna, who stood a few yards away, apparently unharmed. "Just a stumble," he said, still not looking at Clara. "The ground here is uneven." "Thank you," Clara said quietly, "for catching me." Jameson finally looked at her, and Clara saw that he had raised his defenses again, the cold wall settling back into place. "It's my job to keep you safe," he said. But there was something forced in the formality of the answer, and Clara noticed from the almost imperceptible tremor in his voice that he had felt everything too. They rode back to the stables in silence. The atmosphere between them had completely changed. There was a tension in the air that hadn't existed before, charged, electric, dangerous. When they dismounted, Jameson busied himself removing the horses' saddles without a word. Clara stood there, unsure whether to help or leave. "Jameson," she finally said. He stopped what he was doing, but didn't turn around. "What happened out there?" "Nothing happened." He cut her off, still with his back to her. The words came out clipped, because it was easier to lie to Clara than to admit to himself that everything had happened. He could still smell her perfume, could still recall the way she'd fit perfectly in his arms, and that was exactly the kind of thought he needed to erase. "You almost fell. I caught you. End of story." "But—" He stopped abruptly and let out a "Sister, Clara." Now he turned and his expression was back to its usual cold control. "Nothing happened. Nothing can happen." The words hit like a bucket of cold water. Clara felt her face flush with embarrassment. "Of course," she said, lifting her chin. "You made that very clear in our agreement." Jameson studied her for a moment, and Clara could have sworn she saw conflict in his eyes, the battle between what he wanted and what he allowed himself to want. But he only nodded. "Exactly." Clara walked out of the stables with as much dignity as she could muster, but as she walked back to the house, her mind couldn't stop replaying those seconds in Jameson's arms, the way he'd looked at her, the ragged breathing, the certainty that, for a moment, she'd seen the real man behind all the walls, and the absolute certainty that he had felt it too. That night at dinner, Jameson was even more distant than usual. He answered Clara's attempts at conversation in monosyllables, avoided looking at her directly. But Clara noticed other things, the way his fingers tensed around his fork when she spoke, how he'd glance at her hands when he thought she wasn't looking, the way his jaw tightened when she leaned over to reach for the salt. Every time Clara smiled at John or Rosie, Jameson lowered his eyes to his plate. It was a futile attempt to convince himself that simply not looking would be enough, because every time he did look, he found some new detail to admire in her. The delicate way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the quiet smile, the gentle way she cared for the children. And the more he noticed these small things, the harder it became to keep the walls he'd built around his own heart intact. What had happened out in the fields had affected them both, and no matter how much Jameson tried to deny it, Clara knew he had felt the same thing she had. The problem was that neither of them knew what to do about it. When Clara went up to her room that night, she stopped in front of the window overlooking the stables. For a moment, she had felt safe in Jameson's arms. More than safe. She had felt wanted. And for the first time since they'd married, Clara wondered what would happen if she let her own feelings surface. What would happen if she stopped fighting the attraction she felt growing stronger every day? It was a dangerous thought, one that could shatter the fragile balance they'd built. But as she got ready for bed, she couldn't push it away. Nor could she stop herself from wishing Jameson hadn't pulled away so quickly. On Saturday morning, Jameson announced they needed to go into town. "There are some documents to sign at the county office," he said over breakfast, "and I need to take care of some things at the bank." Clara nodded without giving it much thought, but when she got ready to leave, Jameson appeared at her bedroom door. "Wear something nice," he said. "The whole town is going to be watching us." It was then that Clara realized this would be the first time they'd appear in public as husband and wife since the wedding. She chose a light blue dress that brought out her eyes and pinned her hair up in a delicate, elegant style. When she came downstairs, Jameson was waiting by the car, wearing a white dress shirt and dark pants. He looked her over as she approached, and Clara thought she saw approval in his eyes. "You look perfect," he said, opening the car door for her. The chivalrous gesture surprised her. At home, Jameson rarely showed such courtesies. The drive into town was silent, but Clara could feel the tension building as they got closer to downtown. When they parked in front of the county office, Clara saw the first heads turning their way. "Clara, remember," Jameson said quietly, leaning slightly toward her. "We're a happy, deeply in love couple." He got out of the car and came around to open her door. When Clara stepped out, Jameson offered his arm naturally, but as soon as they started walking, he surprised her. His hand slid from her arm to her waist, pulling her against his side in a gesture that screamed possessiveness. Clara felt the heat of his palm through the fabric of her dress, felt how his fingers spread, firm and sure, against the curve of her waist. "Smile," Jameson murmured in her ear, his voice low and intimate, his lips nearly brushing her temple. Everyone's watching. And they were. Clara could feel dozens of eyes on them as they walked down the main sidewalk. Women paused their conversations to watch them. Men nodded respectfully to Jameson, but their gazes lingered curiously on her. "That's her, all right," Clara heard an older woman whisper. "The girl who married the Montgomery boy." "She's prettier than I imagined," another voice answered. Clara felt her face heat up but kept the smile fixed in place. Jameson's hand tightened slightly on her waist, as if he could sense her discomfort, pulling her even closer against his body. At the county office, the paperwork went quickly. Jameson signed a few documents related to the property, while Clara waited beside him, trying to ignore the curious glances from the clerks. "Congratulations on your recent marriage," the secretary said when they finished. "You two make a lovely couple." "Thank you," Clara answered, forcing a smile. When they left the office, things got even more intense. It was market day in town, and the central square was packed. Clara noticed several people had stopped what they were doing, just to watch them. "Let's head to the bank," Jameson said, but his hand never left her waist as they crossed the square. Clara caught fragments of conversation around her. He looks hopelessly in love with her. Lucky girl, marrying the richest man in the county. They say it was love at first sight. Each comment left her more uncomfortable. People were building a romantic fantasy around a marriage that was pure convenience. "Relax," Jameson murmured, noticing her tension. "You're stiff as a board." "It's hard to relax with everyone staring at us," she whispered back. Jameson stopped abruptly and turned to face her. Before Clara could react, he placed both hands on her waist, pulling her against him. "Then let's give them something real to look at," he said, his eyes fixed on hers. For a moment, Clara thought he was going to kiss her right there, in the middle of the square. Her heart raced, and she wondered what she'd do if he actually did. But Jameson only smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and draped his arm around her shoulders in an even more intimate way. "Better?" he asked, starting to walk again. Clara couldn't answer. His arm around her shoulders made her feel small and protected, but it also stirred other feelings she was trying to ignore. At the bank, the pattern repeated. Jameson kept up constant physical contact, a hand on her back, then fingers laced together, then his arm around her waist again. To any onlooker, they looked like a couple who couldn't bear to be apart, and with every touch, Clara felt her resistance melt a little more. There was something hypnotic in the way Jameson played the role of the devoted husband. The looks he gave her were intense and possessive. The way he touched her was intimate, as if he had every right to do so. Clara began to wonder where the act ended and reality began, especially when she noticed Jameson's eyes lingering on her lips when he thought she wasn't looking. After the bank, Jameson suggested they get coffee at the bakery on the square. "We can't head straight home," he explained. "It would look strange." The bakery was packed, and Clara noticed her entrance caused a quiet but noticeable stir, along with a few curious glances. Jameson chose a table by the window, where anyone in the square could see them, and once they sat down, he did something that left Clara completely thrown off balance. He took her hand across the table and brought it to his lips, kissing her fingers with a tenderness that felt genuine. His lips lingered against her skin a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "You're overdoing it," Clara whispered, trying to pull her hand back. "Am I?" Jameson looked her straight in the eyes, still holding her hand. "Or am I just doing what any man married to you would do?" There was something in his voice that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. "Jameson, you're beautiful, Clara," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Any man in this town would give anything to be in my place." Clara knew he was performing, knew the words were meant for the audience around them, but there was something in his eyes, a dark, deep intensity, that made her question whether it was only an act. "And you?" she asked impulsively. "Do you feel lucky?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Jameson went still, his fingers pausing their movement against her hand. For a moment, Clara saw something real cross his face, something that made her stomach tighten with anticipation. "More than I should," he said quietly. And Clara was certain that answer wasn't for the audience. It was only for her. The moment broke when the waitress brought their coffee, beaming exaggeratedly. "How lovely seeing a couple so in love," the woman said. "You two radiate happiness." Jameson let go of Clara's hand and leaned back in his chair, slipping back into his usual mask of the happy husband. "Thank you," he answered politely, a devastating smile on his face that left Clara feeling almost hypnotized. "It's an act. It's all an act," she kept telling herself. But Clara sensed that something had shifted. The tension between them was even thicker now, an invisible thread stretching dangerously tight. When they returned to the car, Jameson opened the door for her again. "Thank you." But as Clara moved past him to get in, he placed his hand on her waist to guide her. The touch was brief, but Clara felt every finger against her skin through the fabric, a lingering mark of heat that stayed long after he'd pulled away. On the drive back, the silence was different, charged, full of unspoken things. "You did well today," Jameson finally said as they neared the ranch. "Thank you," Clara answered. "So did you." "It was just an act," he said, but it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "I know," Clara lied, because deep down she felt that not all of it had been an act. The touches had lasted longer than necessary. The looks had been too intense, and those words, "more than I should," echoed in her mind. When they got home, Jameson helped Clara out of the car, but this time, as she moved past him, he didn't touch her, as if he were deliberately avoiding contact. "I'm going to check on the horses," he said quickly, walking off toward the stables. Clara stood in the yard, watching him go. The town had spoken. It had woven a romantic narrative around them. And for the first time since they'd married, Clara wondered if maybe the town wasn't entirely wrong, because deep down Clara knew the act had ended. The attraction burning between them now was far too real to hide. The night was warm and heavy when Clara stepped out onto the porch. Dinner had been even tenser than usual. Jameson had barely spoken, answering her attempts at conversation in monosyllables. Then he'd shut himself in the study for 2 hours. Clara couldn't sleep. There was something in the air that left her restless, an electricity that made her skin prickle. The porch was steeped in shadow, lit only by the faint light spilling from the living room. The smell of damp earth and jasmine perfumed the night air. Clara leaned against the railing, breathing deeply. The sky was heavy with dark clouds threatening rain. "Can't sleep?" Jameson's deep voice behind her made her jump. She turned and saw him standing in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the light from inside. "You scared me," she said, a hand flying to her chest. Jameson approached slowly, his hands in his pockets. There was something different about him, a tension Clara could feel from yards away. "You seem nervous," he observed, stopping a few steps from her. "I'm not nervous." "You're lying." Clara turned back toward the dark landscape. "Maybe I am. Maybe it's hard to relax when my own husband treats me like a stranger." Jameson stayed silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower. "I don't treat you like a stranger." "No?" Clara turned to face him. "Then, how do you treat me, Jameson? Like someone I can't let get too close?" The brutal honesty of the answer hit like a blow. "Why?" Jameson took a step toward her. His eyes gleamed dangerously in the dim light. "Because you're dangerous." "Me?" Clara let out a bitter laugh. "I'm the least dangerous person alive. To me, you are. That doesn't make sense." "It does." Jameson took another step. Now he was close enough for her to feel the heat radiating off his body. "Clara, you showed up here with your enigmatic eyes and your desperate courage, and you turned my life upside down." Clara felt her heart race. "I don't understand. You want to know why I treat you like a stranger?" His voice was dropping lower, growing more intense. "Because if I don't, if I let you get close, I'm going to do something I shouldn't." "Like what?" Jameson's eyes dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. "You know exactly what." The air between them was charged with electricity. Clara could feel the tension building, dangerous and uncontrollable. "Maybe I want you to," she whispered, surprising herself. Jameson went completely still. "Don't say that." "Why not?" "Because you have no idea what you're asking for." "Then show me." The words came out before Clara could stop them. Jameson looked at her as if she'd just thrown down a challenge. "Clara." His voice was a dangerous warning. "Are you scared, Jameson?" "Of what?" "Of losing control." Jameson took one more step, and now they were close enough that Clara could see the fine lines around his eyes. She could feel his breath against her face, warm, uneven, heavy with unspoken promises. "I never lose control," he said, his voice rough. "Never." Clara lifted her chin defiantly, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Then prove it." For a moment Jameson stood perfectly still. Clara could see the battle happening behind his beautiful eyes, reason fighting against something far more primal. Then reason lost. Jameson pulled her against him with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. His arms closed around her waist like a trap, crushing her against his chest. One hand slid up into her hair, fingers tangling in the loose strands, tilting her head back gently. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It wasn't a kiss of seduction. It was a kiss of possession, of pent-up frustration, of a man who had just lost a battle he'd been fighting for weeks. His lips crashed against hers with an almost desperate urgency. Clara felt his teeth graze her lower lip before his tongue swept into her mouth without asking permission. It was intense, overwhelming, completely unlike anything Clara had ever experienced. For a moment, she tried to resist. She brought her hands to his chest, pushing, but her body had other ideas. Instead of pushing him away, her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. Jameson groaned against her lips, a low sound that vibrated through his chest, straight into hers. The hand tangled in. Her hair tightened, tilting her head so he could deepen the kiss further. Clara felt her knees weaken, felt the world spin around her, felt every nerve ending in her body waken to something she hadn't even known existed. It was anger and desire tangled together. It was months of tension finally exploding. It was wrong and right all at once. Jameson's free hand slid to her back, pressing her even closer against him. Clara could feel every taut muscle in his body, could feel his heart, pounding erratically against her chest. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. Jameson didn't pull away right away. He stayed there, his forehead resting against hers, his heavy breathing mingling with her own. His eyes were closed, as if he were trying to gather himself. When he opened them, there was something wild in them, something that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. "You know what? You take away my control," he said, his voice rough. Clara looked at him, still dazed from the kiss. She was torn between the urge to kiss him again and the need to understand what had just happened. "Jameson!" But he was already pulling back, as if suddenly realizing what he'd done. "That was a mistake," he said, running his hands through his hair. That can't happen. But it did. No, it won't happen again. Clara felt anger rise in her chest. You can't just kiss me like that and then pretend it meant nothing. It didn't. Liar. Jameson stared at her, and for a moment, Clara saw vulnerability in his eyes. But it was only an instant. Go to your room, Clara. No. Go, now. There was something dangerous in his voice, a veiled warning that if she didn't leave, he might do something they'd both regret. Clara looked at him a moment longer, then turned and walked toward the door. But before going inside, she stopped and looked back over her shoulder. One day, you're going to stop fighting this, Jameson. And when you do, I hope you're brave enough to admit it. She went inside, leaving him alone on the porch. Jameson stood there for long minutes, staring at the spot where she'd been. He brought his fingers to his lips, still tasting her. He had lost control, completely. Then he whispered into the dark, to no one but himself, "Maybe I already have." Clara couldn't sleep after what happened on the porch. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the kiss, the way Jameson had pulled her against him, the urgency in his lips, his confession, whispered, that she'd heard through the half-open window. "Maybe I already have." The words echoed in her mind, kindling something inside her she could no longer ignore. Around 2 in the morning, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Clara sat up in bed, her heart racing. The footsteps stopped outside her door. For a long minute there was only silence. She could picture Jameson on the other side, wrestling with himself, deciding whether to knock or walk away. Then she heard the soft knock. Clara hesitated only a second before getting up and opening the door. Jameson stood there, barefoot, wearing only dark sweatpants and a t-shirt. His hair was disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it over and over. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. No, she whispered. They looked at each other for a moment that felt eternal. Clara could see the battle happening in his eyes, the last of his resistance falling apart. "Is this wrong?" She echoed the question he hadn't asked, but her voice carried no conviction. Jameson stepped forward until he was inside the room. His hands found her face, holding it with a tenderness that contrasted with the intensity of their earlier kiss. "Wrong would be pretending we don't want this," he said, his thumbs tracing circles on her cheeks. Clara closed her eyes, giving herself over to the touch. "Clara, I tried to resist," he murmured, bringing his face closer to hers. "God knows I've tried, this whole time. And now I can't anymore." The kiss this time was different. It started soft, almost hesitant, as if Jameson were giving her the chance to pull back. But Clara didn't pull back. Instead, her hands rose to his chest, feeling the tense muscles beneath his shirt. Jameson groaned softly against her lips, and the sound shattered whatever hesitation remained. The kiss deepened slowly, drawing them into a wave of sensation. Jameson's hands slid down to her waist, pulling her against him. Clara could feel his masculine warmth enveloping her, could feel his heart pounding. "Clara," he whispered, brushing his lips against her forehead before meeting her eyes again. "Are you sure?" She answered without words. She simply lifted her face and kissed him again, with an intense tenderness that surprised even herself. Gently, Jameson led her to the bed. Every movement was calm, careful, as if he wanted to make sure she felt safe with every step. When she settled against the sheets, she found something in his eyes that made her hold her breath. Admiration, tenderness, and a feeling so deep she still didn't know what to call it. "You're beautiful," he murmured, stroking her face. "So beautiful that sometimes I'm afraid to reach out and find that all of this was just a dream." Clara's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever looked at her that way, as if she was someone truly precious. What followed was less an explosion of passion and more a shared discovery. Jameson enveloped her with a gentleness that spoke louder than any declaration. Every gesture revealed care, respect, and a tenderness that made her forget every insecurity she carried. And it revealed, too, the man finally stripped of his mask of coldness and indifference. Before her was the real Jameson, vulnerable, tender, in love. For an instant, Clara noticed a slight tremor in his hands when his fingers found her skin. It moved her deeply. "I don't want there to be any rush between us," he said quietly. "I want you to feel safe. I want you to feel like you're the only one." Clara smiled softly. "I trust you." And she discovered, in that moment, that she was speaking the absolute truth. Outside, the silence of the night was broken only by the distant song of crickets and the murmur of wind moving through the treetops. The moon spread a silvery veil over the sleeping fields, while the old farmhouse seemed to guard, in absolute secret, the moment when two hearts finally stopped resisting each other. But inside the room, what followed was an intimate dance, slow and careful. Jameson guided her through every new sensation, his experience evident in the way he read her every reaction, in how he knew exactly where to touch to make her sigh. Clara lost herself in the sensations, in the heat of his skin against hers, in the way he whispered her name, thick with a desire that seemed to overwhelm him, in the intensity with which he looked at her, as if she were the only woman in the world. Clara felt as though the world had rearranged itself around her. It was vulnerability and surrender, fear and rapture, all mixed into an experience that left her completely transformed. At one point, Jameson gathered her into his arms, cradling her face between his hands, his eyes never leaving hers. "My Clara," he murmured against her lips, and there was something so romantically possessive in the way he said it that her heart raced. After they'd loved each other, they lay tangled together in the silence of the night. Clara could hear Jameson's heartbeat returning to its normal rhythm, could feel his fingers playing with her hair. "Jameson," she whispered against his chest. This changes everything, doesn't it?" Jameson tensed for a moment. "I know," she said quickly. "I know you're going to try to pretend nothing changed, but it did." Jameson didn't answer, but she felt his arms tighten around her, and in that moment, lying in the dark with the man who had become so much more than a husband of convenience, Clara admitted to herself something she'd been trying to deny for weeks. She was in love with Jameson Montgomery. Completely, dangerously in love. Clara woke up alone. The side of the bed where Jameson had slept no longer held the warmth of his body, a clear sign he'd gotten up early. For a moment, she lay there, replaying every moment of the night before, a silly smile on her lips. She felt different, transformed, as if she'd discovered a part of herself she hadn't even known existed. She slipped a silk robe over her nightgown and went down to breakfast, her heart racing with anticipation, hearing from a distance the muffled sound of Anita May talking to herself while she worked in the kitchen. But when she reached the dining table, Jameson was there, reading the newspaper, and didn't even look up. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," he answered curtly, without looking at her. Clara poured herself coffee, waiting for him to say something, anything that acknowledged what had happened between them. But Jameson stayed silent, hidden behind the newspaper. "Jameson," she said finally. About tonight, You shouldn't have let it happen." His interruption landed like a slap across the face. Clara set her coffee cup down on the table, her hands trembling. "What do you mean?" Jameson finally lowered the newspaper and looked at her. His eyes were cold, distant, as if the warm intimacy of the night before had been nothing but a dream that vanished under the icy chill now stamped on his face. It was a mistake, and mistakes don't repeat themselves. Clara felt as if the floor had vanished beneath her feet. "A mistake," she repeated, her voice coming out weaker than she meant it to. "We have an agreement, Clara. Clear terms. What happened last night violated those terms." "But you said—" "Forget what I said." Jameson stood, folding the newspaper with rough movements. "I was confused and I shouldn't have given in, but now everything's clear. We're going back to the original rules." Clara watched him get ready to leave, feeling as if she were being torn apart from the inside. Did this man have no sensitivity at all? "Jameson, please. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Clara," he said, already heading for the door. "Harder for whom?" she asked, her voice gaining strength. "For you, who can just pretend it meant nothing, or for me who has to live with the fact that I gave myself to a man who treats me like a mistake." Jameson stopped at the door, but didn't turn around. "For both of us," he said finally, and he left. The murmurs and sounds coming from the kitchen went momentarily quiet, Clara noticed, as if everyone in the house had heard the argument and now didn't know how to go back to their chores. Alone in the dining room, Clara felt her heart shatter, but with a crystal-clear certainty. It didn't matter how hard Jameson tried to deny it. It didn't matter how many times he called it a mistake. She had seen the truth in his eyes and in every gesture the night before. She had felt it in the way he'd touched her, the way he'd whispered her name. Jameson Montgomery was in love with her, and as much as the rejection hurt her now, Clara knew that truth always found a way through, even if it took the rest of the year of their agreement for him to admit it. 2 weeks after the night that changed everything, Clara woke to an urgent knock at the door. It was Miss Dolores, her face pale with worry. "Mrs. Montgomery," the housekeeper said, handing over an official envelope. "A summons just arrived for you and the master." Clara felt her blood turn to ice. She recognized the court's letterhead even before opening it. Wayne had filed a formal petition for custody of the children. "Where's Jameson?" Clara asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Out in the pastures, Mom. I already sent Elijah to fetch him." Clara went down to the main sitting room, her hands trembling as she scanned the pages of the petition. With every paragraph, the knot in her throat tightened a little more. Wayne claimed he had rebuilt his life, entered into a new marriage, and regained the stability needed to offer the children a balanced and permanent home. He alleged that his absence during their mother's illness had been only temporary, and that, since then, Clara had blocked every attempt he'd made to reconnect with the siblings. The document also implied that Clara's marriage to Jameson Montgomery had been rushed into solely to create an appearance of stability before the court, describing the union as a carefully arranged convenience meant to keep Wayne from exercising his role as the family's responsible party. When Jameson walked into the room 20 minutes later, still with dirt on his boots and sweat on his shirt, Clara handed him the paper without saying a word. Jameson read in silence, his jaw growing tighter with every line. "When's the hearing?" he asked finally. "Next Friday." Jameson tossed the document onto the table hard. "That bastard isn't going to win this. And if he does?" Clara's voice cracked. "What if the judge decides he's right about our marriage?" Jameson looked at her for a long moment. Since the night they'd spent together, they'd barely spoken. He'd gone back to his earlier coldness, avoiding her whenever he could. But now there was something different in his eyes, a fierce determination. "It's not going to happen," he said. "I'm not going to let him take those children from you." On Friday, Clara wore her best outfit, a navy blue suit Jameson had bought for her without asking her opinion. When they stepped out of the car in front of the courthouse, he offered his arm naturally. "Remember," he murmured in her ear, "we're a couple deeply in love, who married for love." Clara nodded, trying to ignore the shiver his voice caused. The courtroom was small and stuffy. Wayne sat with his lawyer, a thin man with glasses who kept scribbling notes. When the judge entered, everyone stood. He was a middle-aged man, grey-haired with a serious expression. "Be seated," he said, adjusting his glasses. "We're here to review Mr. Wayne Hargrove's petition for custody of the minors, John and Rosie Monroe." Wayne's lawyer rose first. "Your Honor, my client was the late mother's last partner and served for years as the father figure in that household. He is now remarried, has his own residence, stable employment, and a solid family structure. He seeks only to re-establish contact with 2 children he never willingly gave up." Clara felt her stomach tighten. By contrast, the respondent married just days after her mother's passing, joining herself to a man of considerable wealth and social standing. The speed of that union raises serious doubts about its authenticity and suggests the marriage was entered into solely to alter her standing before this court. Furthermore, Your Honor, my client has been prevented from having any contact with the minors since his wife's passing. He was given no opportunity to rebuild the bond he shared with them, having been completely cut off from their lives by the respondent's unilateral decision. Jameson's lawyer rose immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. That insinuation is baseless." "Sustained," said the judge. "Continue, Mr. Mendez, but stick to the facts." "My client questions the stability and legitimacy of this recent marriage. These children need a real home, not a performance." When it was Jameson's lawyer's turn to speak, Clara held her breath. "Your Honor, no amount of financial stability replaces the truth of the facts. These children have lived with Mrs. Clara since their mother's passing because she was the one who stayed by their side when everyone else vanished. Mr. Hargrove left the household months before his wife's death and only returned once he learned the children were in the respondent's care. He showed up only after Mrs. Clara found a legitimate way to offer them security. As for the marriage, it is not this court's place to judge the speed with which 2 people decided to build a family, but rather to assess whether a safe, stable, and loving environment exists for these children today. And every piece of evidence shows that it does." The judge made a few notes, then looked directly at Jameson and Clara. "I'd like to hear from the couple personally," he said. "Mr. Montgomery, is she your first wife?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And how long had you known each other before the marriage?" Jameson hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Our families have known each other for years. Clara and I reconnected after her mother's passing." Technically true, but Clara noticed how skillfully he'd sidestepped the real question. "Mrs. Montgomery." The judge turned to Clara, and she flinched at hearing the surname. "Why did you marry so quickly after your mother's death?" Clara swallowed hard. Because I needed stability to take care of my siblings. And because," she looked at Jameson, "because I love him. And you, Mr. Montgomery, why did you marry?" Jameson looked the judge straight in the eye. "Because Clara made me realize that a house without love is just an empty building. She and the children brought life to my ranch." Clara felt her heart race. There was something in Jameson's voice that sounded too genuine to be only an act. The judge made more notes. "Mr. Hargrove," he turned to Wayne, "do you have any biological children?" "No, Your Honor, but John and Rosie are like my own children. I raised them for 3 years." "Mr. Hargrove, the record shows you left the household months before the children's mother passed away. If you had such great concern for their well-being, why did you stay away during exactly the period when they most needed a responsible adult?" Wayne took a deep breath before answering. "Your Honor, I admit I made mistakes in the past. My wife was very ill, and things between us became extremely difficult. I stepped away for a time to get my finances in order and take care of my emotional health. But I never stopped considering John and Rosie part of my family. When I tried to find them, Mrs. Clara simply disappeared with the children." "I understand." The judge closed the folder. "Gentlemen, I will review all the documents and reports submitted. But let me be clear. The stability of the Montgomerys' marriage will be a determining factor in my decision. We will reconvene in 1 month for the final ruling." The judge sat in silence for a few seconds, flipping back through the documents. "This is not a property dispute. What is at stake is the future of 2 children who have already lost their mother. This court's decision will depend solely on what best serves the interests of the minors." When they left the courthouse, Clara's legs were shaking. "A month," she murmured. "He's going to watch our marriage for a month. Then let's give him a marriage worth watching," Jameson said, his voice hard. He held her gaze for a moment. There was firmness in his voice, but his eyes carried an exhaustion Clara hadn't seen in him before. For the first time, she realized this battle was no longer just hers. He had something to lose too. Back at the ranch, Jameson called Clara into the study for a talk. "We need to talk about how we're going to handle this," he said, closing the door. The soft click of the lock seemed to seal them off from the rest of the house. Through the window, the wind slowly stirred the branches of the old oak tree, while the silence of the study made every breath strangely audible. Clara sat down, still, processing everything that had happened. "The judge is going to send social workers to visit us," Jameson continued. "They'll observe our daily life, our interaction with the children, our intimacy as a couple." The word intimacy hung in the air between them like a ghost. "What are you suggesting?" Clara asked. "That we need to act like real husband and wife, at least in public." Clara felt her face heat up. "What do you mean?" Jameson stepped closer to the desk where she sat. "Displays of affection, warm conversations, sleeping in the same room." Jameson said the words without faltering, but inside each one seemed to demand an almost physical effort. Sharing the same room meant fighting every night against a closeness he was no longer sure he could withstand. Clara's heart raced. "Jameson, I know," he said quickly. "I know that after what happened, and after what I said," he ran his hands through his hair, "but the children depend on us. Now we can't let Wayne win." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "And afterward?" she asked. "When the judge decides, afterward, we go back to the original agreement." The sentence came out firm. Only the slight tightening of his jaw betrayed what it cost him to say it. Those words should have hurt her, and in truth they did. But Clara thought of John and Rosie, and she knew she would do anything to protect them. "All right," she said, "for their sake." Jameson nodded, but Clara noticed he avoided her eyes. That night at dinner, Jameson did something that surprised her. He sat down beside her instead of at the head of the table. "How was your day, sweetheart?" he asked, his hand finding hers on the table. Clara shivered at the touch. His fingers wrapped around hers naturally. The gesture should have felt like just part of the act. But Jameson realized, too late, that he wasn't pretending the urge to reach for her. It was productive. And yours? Better now that I'm home with you. The words sounded far too natural. For a moment, Clara forgot it was only an act. John and Rosie watched the exchange with curiosity. Are you two going to have a baby? Rosie asked suddenly. For a brief instant, the image crossed Jameson's mind uninvited. Clara laughing through the house, a child running through the yard, and he had to push the thought away almost violently. Clara nearly choked on her water. Jameson squeezed her hand. Someday, maybe, he answered, smiling at the girl. Would you like to have a little baby in the house? Yes, Rosie said, excited. It'd be like having a little sister to play with. Clara shot Jameson a look of barely disguised panic. He gave her a glance that said, relax, it's just for show. But when their eyes met, Clara saw something there that made her wonder if it really was only that. After dinner, Jameson walked her to the bedroom. The two of them stood in silence for a few seconds. Inside the room, the space seemed smaller than before, charged with an unexpected intimacy. For the first time, sharing that room wasn't merely a consequence of an agreement. I'll sleep on the couch, he said, gesturing to the large armchair in the corner. But if anyone comes to check, it'll look like we're sharing the bed. Clara nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment she felt. Jameson, she said as he was preparing to leave. Yes? Thank you. For fighting for them. For us. Jameson went still for a moment. It's what any husband would do. But even as he said it, Jameson realized he was no longer thinking like a man fulfilling a contract. He was thinking like someone who was beginning to fear losing his own wife. And from the way he said it, Clara sensed that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to believe his own words. She comforted herself with a small hope in her heart. Even if it was only for show, being close to Jameson again made her soul feel more whole. And that night, before falling asleep, Clara no longer knew what frightened her more, losing her siblings or losing herself to Jameson Montgomery. Over the following week, the performance continued. Jameson began having dinner with Clara and the children every night. He held her hand during meals, kissed her forehead when he said goodbye each morning, slept on the couch in her room, keeping up the appearance that they shared the same space. But Clara began to notice small distractions in him. Sometimes Jameson would interrupt a conversation just to watch her smiling at Rosie. Other times his eyes would meet hers across the room and linger there long enough that both of them had to pretend nothing had happened. At night, she'd hear him tossing on the couch, clearly uncomfortable. On Thursday, Clara decided she couldn't keep pretending not to notice anymore. Jameson had just come in from the pastures when she confronted him in the sitting room. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. Jameson took off his hat, running his hands through his hair. "If it's about the social worker's visit tomorrow, It's not about that." He looked at her, sensing something different in her tone. "Then what?" Clara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "About us." Jameson went still. "There is no us, Clara." The words came out immediately, too quickly, like rehearsed answers he'd been repeating for weeks to keep the truth from slipping out. "There's just an agreement we're honoring." "Is that so?" Clara took a step toward him. "Then why do your hands shake when you touch me? Why do you keep looking at me when you think I don't notice? You're imagining things." "Am I?" Clara moved closer. "Why do you kiss my forehead in the morning even when no one else is around?" Jameson looked away. "It's habit. Habit." Clara let out a humorless laugh. "Jameson, stop lying." "I'm not lying." "Yes, you are." Clara positioned herself in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "You're lying to me and to yourself." Jameson met her gaze, and Clara saw the battle happening in his eyes. "Clara, don't do this." "Do what? Tell the truth? Complicate things?" "Things are already complicated." Clara touched his chest lightly. "Ever since that night," Jameson pulled back as if burned. "That night was a mistake." "Was it?" Clara followed him. "Because for me, it was the first time I ever truly felt alive." "Clara, please, I love you, Jameson." The words came out before she could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Jameson stood completely still, as if he'd been struck. He didn't answer, not because he didn't know what he felt, but because hearing those words made it impossible to keep hiding behind the carefully controlled life he'd built. "You don't know what you're saying," he said finally. "I know exactly what I'm saying." Clara lifted her chin, though her Heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. I love you and you love me too. A muscle in Jameson's jaw tightened. That's absurd. Is it? She took another step. Only inches remained between them. Then look at me. Jameson held her gaze. She watched the conflict build behind his eyes, as if two opposing forces were waging a silent battle inside him. Tell me you feel nothing. He remained still. Say that all of it, Clara continued, her voice barely above a whisper. That every look, every gentle gesture, means absolutely nothing. Jameson looked away. It was a small movement, but Clara noticed it, and smiled with a delicate sadness. You can't. He took a deep breath. Clara, say it. Slowly, she brought her hands to his chest. She felt his heart beating strong and fast beneath her palm. Say that I'm nothing but an obligation. The silence seemed to last an eternity. Jameson closed his eyes. His breathing grew heavy. For the first time, since Clara had known him, he seemed tired. Not physically, but tired of carrying the weight of his own walls. The words died before they were born. He shook his head slowly. I can't. Can't what? Jameson opened his eyes. There was a different light in them. It wasn't anger nor coldness. It was fear. An old fear. Raw. Almost childlike. I can't let you in. Clara stayed silent. She sensed that if she said anything in that moment, he would raise every wall back up. So she simply waited. Jameson let out a trembling breath. You deserve someone whole. His voice broke for the first time. Not someone like me. Like you. He ran his hands over his face. It took several seconds before he answered, as if every word had to be torn from somewhere very deep. Because I'll end up hurting you. Clara took another step. Now their faces were close enough that she could feel his breath. Who made you believe that? Jameson remained still. She repeated, even softer. Who convinced you that loving you was a mistake? The words struck some part of him that had stayed shut for years. His chest rose slowly, then fell. He shut his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, Clara had the impression she was looking at a completely different man from the one she'd met in the library. All the firmness that had always defined him seemed to waver. The mask was finally giving way. It was. The word came out almost inaudible. He cut himself off, ran a hand over the back of his neck, turned his face away as if still searching for a way to escape the conversation, but there was nowhere left to run. Clara had already found the wound. Jameson took one last deep breath. My first fiancée. The words fell heavy between them. Lavinia. He swallowed hard. We were engaged for 2 years. His eyes lost focus for a moment, caught in a distant memory. A week before the wedding. His voice broke. She ran off with my best friend. Clara felt all the anger she'd carried against Jameson melt away. She finally understood the coldness, the distance, the fear of getting involved. Jameson. She said I was too cold, too controlling, that I'd never be able to love anyone, because all I thought about was business and property. He opened his eyes and Clara saw old pain there. Maybe she was right. She was wrong, Jameson. Don't you understand, Clara? I understand perfectly. Clara put her hands on his face. It had been so many years since anyone had touched him that way, without demanding anything, without expecting anything in return, only because she wanted to reach the part of him that still believed it didn't deserve to be loved. You were betrayed by people you trusted. That doesn't make you incapable of love. It makes you careful. And what if she was right? What if I really am incapable of giving you what you deserve? And what if she wasn't? Clara moved closer. What if you've been punishing yourself for something that was never your fault? Jameson looked at her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. Clara, I'm 40 years old. You're 22. You deserve someone who what? Who isn't you? Clara smiled through the tears beginning to form in her eyes. Jameson, I didn't fall in love with your age or your money. I fell in love with the man who takes care of the children when he thinks no one's watching. With the man who defends me against Wayne. With the man whose hands tremble when he touches me because he feels too much to hide it. Jameson stayed silent for a long moment, studying her face. Do you really believe that? He asked quietly. I do. And if I disappoint you? And if you don't? Jameson raised his hands and touched her face with a gentleness that contrasted with all the strength Clara knew he possessed. Then he closed his eyes for a moment. He looked like a man exhausted from waging war against himself. When he opened them again, there was surrender where only resistance had lived before. "I didn't want to fall in love with you," he whispered. Clara felt her heart stop. "But I did. Completely." The confession came out like a defeat and a victory at once. "Ever since that first morning when you appeared in my library and knelt on the floor in front of me, so desperate, you turned my life upside down." He traced his thumb across her lips. "I tried to resist. God knows I tried. But you're too brave, too beautiful, too strong, and I'm too weak to keep pretending I don't love you." Clara felt the tears flow freely down her face. "Say it again." "What?" "That you love me." Jameson smiled, the first devastating, unguarded smile she'd seen from him since they'd married. "I love you, Clara Montgomery, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." And then he kissed her. It was different from every kiss before. There was no desperate urgency, no repressed anger. It was pure love expressing itself through the most intimate touch two human beings could share. When the kiss ended, neither of them stepped back. They stayed there, breathing the same air, as if the mere thought of creating distance had become unbearable again. Outside, the wind made the trees whisper against the windows of the old ranch house, and unexpectedly, Jameson had the strange sensation that, after so many years, this place had finally become a home again. "And now?" Clara asked, her breath still mingled with his. Jameson stayed quiet for a few moments without answering. His eyes traveled over her face as though discovering it for the first time, memorizing every feature, unable to believe she was still there. With infinite tenderness, he rested his forehead against hers and closed his eyes for a brief moment. "Now, we discovered together how to turn all of this into a life." Clara smiled, and the smile lit something he'd believed lost for many years. "And the rules of our agreement?" A low laugh escaped Jameson's lips, light and almost disbelieving. It was a rare sound, warmed by a happiness he no longer expected to know. "Let them stay behind. Some promises are worth far more than any signature." Clara let out a small laugh through the tears still shining in her eyes. Who would have thought the mighty Jameson Montgomery would end up surrendering to his own heart? He raised his hand and brushed away, with his thumb, a tear that kept lingering on her face. "It wasn't my heart that defeated me." His eyes met hers with an unguarded tenderness. "It was you." And before Clara could answer, Jameson kissed her again, unhurried, like a man who no longer needed to steal a moment from fate, but could finally live inside it. The kiss carried the sweetness of silent promises and the calm of two hearts that, after resisting for so long, had finally found their way back to each other. Night. For the first time since they'd married, Jameson lay down beside Clara with no couch standing between them. The room stayed steeped in quiet, lit only by the moonlight slipping through the curtains and casting silver reflections across the wooden floor. They didn't make love. There were still memories to share, wounds to understand, and fears that needed to be named before any further surrender could happen. But they stayed wrapped in each other's arms, listening to each other. Breathe, discovering that true intimacy began exactly in that shared silence. Jameson idly stroked Clara's hair, letting his fingers slide through the strands with a gentleness that felt like a belated confession. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the calm rhythm of a heart that for so long had learned to beat alone. "Jameson," she whispered, nearly asleep. She lifted her face slightly to find him in the dim light. "I'm never going to hurt you." For a moment, Jameson simply looked at her. There was a quiet emotion in his gaze, the kind that needed no words to exist. Then he pulled her a little closer into his arms, as if wishing to protect her even from ghosts she'd never known. "And I'm going to spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of the love you've given me." Clara smiled, brushing her lips lightly against his chest, right over his heart. "You already are." Her voice was barely a breath. "You always were. It just took you a while to believe it." Jameson closed his eyes. For the first time since Lavinia, he let someone cross every wall he had built around his own soul, and he discovered, with a mixture of wonder and gratitude, that Clara didn't shrink back from his scars. She stayed there, embracing every part of him with the same tenderness with which she held his hands. Outside, the ranch rested under the soft silence of the night. The wind moved slowly across the fields, and the stars seemed to keep watch over that moment with the discretion of old witnesses. Wrapped in each other's arms, both understood that love rarely arrived like a storm. Sometimes it came like this instead, quiet, patient, and inevitable, until it became impossible to imagine life without it. Clara fell asleep, lulled by the steady rhythm of Jameson's breathing, with no idea that the greatest proof of that love still awaited them on the horizon. The day of the final ruling arrived under a grey sky that mirrored Clara's anxiety. She stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the navy blue suit Jameson had given her. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to pin up her hair. Jameson appeared behind her, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror. "You look beautiful," he said, placing his hands on her shoulders. "I'm nervous," Clara admitted. "I know." Jameson kissed the top of her head. "But no matter what happens today, we'll face it together." Clara turned in his arms. "What if we don't?" Jameson placed a finger on her lips. "Let's not think about the what if. Let's think about what we know, that John and Rosie are loved, cared for, and safe with us." Clara nodded, taking a deep breath. Jameson was right. They had done everything right. Now it was time to trust the court. At the courthouse, the atmosphere was even tenser than the first time. Wayne looked thinner, with deep circles under his eyes and hands that trembled slightly, signs that didn't escape. Clara's notice. The judge entered promptly at 2 in the afternoon. Everyone rose in respect. "You may be seated," he said, arranging some papers. "I am here to announce my decision regarding the custody of the minors, John and Rosie Monroe." Clara felt Jameson take her hand, gripping it tightly. During the discovery phase of these proceedings, this court ordered home visits to both residences and reviewed the reports prepared by the social services team, along with the testimony given by the parties and witnesses. He paused, putting on his glasses. As to Mr. Wayne Hargrove, the reports reveal a recent history of instability incompatible with the exercise of custody. There is consistent evidence of alcohol abuse, reports of aggressive behavior, and a domestic environment that at this time does not offer the emotional security necessary for the minor's development. Clara felt a wave of relief, but didn't dare celebrate yet. As to the Montgomery residence, the reports describe a stable, well-organized and emotionally healthy environment. The children show a strong emotional bond with their sister, are fully settled into their studies and the routine of the property, and display clear signs of security, growth, and belonging. The judge took off his glasses and looked directly at Clara and Jameson. It has also been demonstrated that the Montgomery's union constitutes a stable family unit, marked by respect, cooperation, and shared responsibility, circumstances that contribute directly to the minor's well-being. In that moment, Clara and Jameson exchanged a silent glance, charged with all the love they had discovered in each other. A small, intimate smile passed between them, as if they shared a precious secret known only to the two of them. Clara felt tears of relief beginning to form in her eyes. This court does not seek merely a roof for two children. It seeks the place where they can grow up safely, surrounded by care, stability, and affection. And every piece of evidence produced throughout these proceedings points in the same direction. Therefore, the judge said, striking his gavel, given the evidence in the record, I grant permanent custody of John Monroe and Rosie Monroe to Mrs. Clara Montgomery, with the minors remaining within the family unit formed with Mr. Jameson Montgomery. I find the petition filed by Mr. Wayne Hargrove without merit. The sound of the gavel echoed. They threw the room like music to Clara's ears. She turned to Jameson, who pulled her into a tight embrace. "We did it," he whispered in her ear. "We did it." Jameson held her tightly. There was no need for words. Clara simply turned her face toward him. For the first time since it had all begun, that embrace wasn't a gesture meant to convince a judge. It was simply the way he'd found to tell her that she would never face anything alone again. Wayne stood up abruptly, his chair clattering to the floor. "This is absurd," he shouted. "I raised those children." "Mr. Hargrove, control yourself. Your outburst will be entered into the record. If this behavior continues, I will have you removed from the courtroom." Wayne looked at Clara with hatred in his eyes, but she no longer felt afraid. She felt only pity for a man who had lost everything because he couldn't control his own demons. When they left the courthouse, Clara ran to the car where John and Rosie were, waiting with Miss Dolores. "You're going to stay with us forever," she said, hugging both children. "Forever. I knew everything would turn out fine," John said, smiling. "Jameson promised he wouldn't let anyone take us." "And I always keep my promises," Jameson said. kneeling down to the boy's height. "You're our family now." Rosie broke free from Clara's hug and ran to Jameson, who picked her up without hesitation. "Can you be like my real daddy now?" the girl asked. Jameson looked at Clara for a moment. She smiled through her tears and gave a small nod of agreement. Then he turned his eyes back to Rosie. "If you'll give me that privilege, it would be the greatest honor of my life." Jameson answered, his voice thick with emotion. "I want that, Jameson," Rosie said, kissing his cheek. "I want it so much." Back at the ranch, there was a small celebration. Anita May prepared a real feast, including the children's favorite cake. The staff came to congratulate the family. For the first time since arriving there, Clara felt truly whole and at home. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Jameson found Clara on the porch. The breeze drifted through the garden, carrying the scent of the rose bushes, while the lights of the house went out one by one behind them. For a long moment he simply watched her in silence, the way he always did when she didn't notice. "What is it?" Clara asked, coming closer with a calm smile. Jameson gently took her hand in his. "Today, watching you with the children, I realized something." She tilted her head, waiting. "For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of the future." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "You put an end to the loneliness of this house, Clara. You filled every room with laughter and filled a stubborn man with hope." She smiled, moved. "Jameson." He raised his hand to her face, stroking her cheek with his thumb. "I will always be grateful for the day. You knocked on my library door, but there's still one thing I'd like to do." "What?" He held her gaze with a tenderness that, months before, would have been impossible. "I want to give you a memory that wasn't born from fear or necessity." He paused briefly. "I want to watch you walk toward me because you chose to. I want to promise my love before God, before the children, and before the people who are part of our lives, with no arrangements, no obligations. Just because I can, no longer imagine a life that isn't by your side." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Are you asking me?" Jameson smiled, that rare smile, reserved only for her. "I'm asking my wife to marry me again, this time the way you always deserved." Clara couldn't breathe. "I know we're already legally married," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. "But this time it's not a contract. It's my soul asking for yours. I want to propose to you because I love you, not because we need an arrangement." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring, an emerald surrounded by small diamonds. "The emerald reminds me of your eyes," he said, "and I want to spend the rest of my life looking into them every morning." Clara was crying so hard she could barely speak. "Yes," she finally managed to say. "Yes, you already have my heart. I accept, my love." Jameson stood and kissed her deeply, then spun her around, laughing. When he set her back down, he slid the ring onto her finger. "Now we're a real family," he said. "We always were," Clara answered, "from the very first day, even when we didn't know it." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, looking up at the starry sky above the ranch that was now truly a home for both of them. "Jameson," Clara said after a while. Thank you for saving me, for saving the children, for giving us a home." Jameson looked at her with that smile she'd learned to love, the one he saved only for her. "You're the one who saved me, Clara. You came into my life like an unexpected storm and showed me that a closed heart is worth nothing. Then we saved each other." "Yes, my love, and I'm grateful for that." The following Sunday, right after the service at the small Ashford Crossing Church, Pastor Samuel walked through the gates of the Montgomery Ranch. There was no luxury, no important guests, only the people who had walked alongside them from the very beginning. Miss Dolores was already discreetly wiping her eyes before the ceremony even began. Anita May adjusted the garden flowers for the third time, along the path with all the solemnity a 5-year-old girl could muster. John came right behind her. There was no longer fear in his eyes, only pride. When Clara appeared among the rose bushes wearing a beautiful white lace dress, Jameson completely lost the ability to hide what he felt. Miss Dolores raised her hand to her mouth, whispering to Anita May, "Look at him," she murmured. "He's in love like a 20-year-old boy." Both women smiled, sharing the secret. The pastor spoke. Little, very little, as good pastors often do. Some marriages begin at the altar, Others begin when two people decide to carry each other's weight. Today, you haven't come here to build a covenant. You've come to give thanks for the one God has already strengthened. Jameson spoke his vows with solemnity and emotion. I promise to keep choosing you on the easy days and the hard ones. I promise never again to hide my heart from the one who made it a better place. And I promise that no shadow will ever reach this family again, as long as I have the strength to protect it. Clara, in turn, chose words full of truth and love. I promise to remind the man I love every single day that he will never have to carry his pain alone, because now it belongs to me too, just as my joy belongs to you. The seasons passed. The fields bloomed again. The old house was no longer known as Jameson Montgomery's silent house. In Ashford Crossing, everyone simply started calling it the Montgomery family ranch. It became a common sight to see Clara handing out pies to the neighbors, while Jameson pretended to complain about the number of visitors, though he was always the first to open the gate. The children grew up. Rosie was never afraid of thunder again. John became Caleb Tucker's inseparable shadow, learning every inch of the land that had once sheltered him. Over time, even the townspeople noticed a transformation no one would have thought possible. Jameson Montgomery started smiling. Not often, but he smiled. And every time he did, all you had to do was look at Clara to understand why. On a beautiful sunny morning, Clara discovered she was pregnant. When she told Jameson, he swept her into his arms and spun her around the room, laughing with pure joy. "So," he said with a mischievous smile, his hand resting on her belly, "do you think it's a boy or a girl?" "It doesn't matter," Clara answered, her eyes glistening. "It'll be perfect, because it'll be part of both of us." When they told the children, John hugged Clara tightly, and Rosie bounced with joy at the news of another baby joining the family. She started dancing around the kitchen, making everyone laugh. "Our baby," Jameson whispered, as if the word were the most beautiful in the language, and maybe it was. The baby was born on a spring morning, when the roses in the garden were in full bloom. It was a girl, with her father's eyes and her mother's smile. They named her Isabel, which means consecrated to God, because she truly was a blessing. John and Rosie fell in love with their niece instantly, though Rosie treated her sometimes like a baby sister and sometimes like a doll who really cried. Jameson cried the first time he held her, the tears of a man who never thought he could be this happy. The seasons passed quietly, the way they do for those who have finally found a place they wish to stay. 5 summers after the day Clara had crossed, on her knees and with a shattered heart, the threshold of the Montgomery Ranch Library, the property was no longer the same, nor were its people. On a golden summer afternoon, the garden overflowed with life. The rose bushes bloomed in long, fragrant beds, while small clusters of lavender swayed gently in the breeze. In the distance, patches of bluebonnets colored the fields like blue brushstrokes beneath the vast Texas sky. Clara walked barefoot through the grass, holding little Joshua's hands as he practiced his first steps among the flowers. With every attempt, the boy laughed loudly, wobbling with the determination unique to children who still believe the whole world exists just to welcome them. Jameson opened his arms. Joshua let go of his mother's hands and ran toward his father on unsteady legs, stumbling twice before diving into that embrace, which, to him, was the safest place in the world. Jameson lifted him into his arms, and the boy's laughter spread across the garden like music. Further off, John, now 13, led a young colt around the training pen under the watchful eyes of Caleb and Elijah. Horses had become his greatest passion. He had learned to respect them, understand them, and win them over with the same calm he saw in Jameson. Between chores, he helped Caleb in the orchard, with the fences and the flower beds, always eager to learn one more skill. Jameson watched it all in silence, with the quiet pride of a man who saw in that boy not just an excellent worker, but a young man of integrity, generosity, and readiness to build his own future. Rosie, now 10, arranged little toy teacups on a blanket, spread beneath the enormous canopy of an old live oak, whose shade had held so many of the family's conversations. Over the years, Isabel, nearly 4, joined in the make-believe with all the solemnity of someone who believed she was serving the most important tea in Texas to her dolls. Jameson approached Clara without a sound, holding Joshua's tiny hand as the boy took a few more wobbly steps. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "Look at us," she murmured. He swept his eyes across the garden, the children, the horses grazing in the distance, the house that no longer knew silence, the hands talking near the stables, the scent of flowers mingling with the smell of sun-warmed earth. Then he smiled, that peaceful smile that years before no one would have imagined seeing on his face. "Our family." Clara laced her fingers through his. "Do you regret anything in your life?" Jameson took a moment to answer. His eyes stayed on the children, as if every memory of the past few years passed silently before him. "Only one thing." She lifted her face. "What?" He squeezed her hand gently. "That I waited so long to let myself love you, and to believe that I could be loved too." Clara smiled tenderly. Jameson turned his eyes back to Joshua, who stretched out his little arms, asking to be held again. He took him into his arms and kissed his hair before answering, almost as if speaking to himself. "But maybe I needed you to come along and teach me that a man doesn't grow stronger by hiding his heart, but by having the courage to give it away." Clara rested her head on his shoulder. "I think we both needed to wait for the right moment." Jameson turned to her. There was the same quiet intensity in his gaze that she'd learned to love since their very first kiss. "Maybe." He kissed her forehead gently. "But now we have a whole lifetime." The sun began to sink behind the hills, pouring golden tones over the fields of the Montgomery ranch. In the distance, the neighing of the horses mixed with the children's laughter and the lazy song of birds returning to their nests. In Little Ashford Crossing, no one remembered Mr. Jameson Montgomery, once known for his coldness and isolation, anymore. Now, when his name came up, people smiled as they spoke of the rancher who had learned to laugh with his children, who made a point of having dinner with his family every night, and who never let Clara cross a garden without offering her his hand. As for Wayne Hargrove, he became nothing more than a distant memory, a shadow that time had finally dissolved. Fear no longer found a place in that house. Jameson looked at everyone around him and understood, with a peace he never imagined he'd experience, that true wealth had never been in the land he owned, nor in the name he carried. It was right there, in the scent of the roses, in the girls' laughter scattered across the garden, in Joshua's little hand gripping his shirt, in Clara's eyes, still looking at him as though she chose him every single day. And it was then that he knew without the slightest doubt that he had finally found what he had searched for his whole life: a home, a family, and a love that quietly had forever transformed a man who once believed he'd learned to live alone. If this story of redemption, courage, and true love touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And if you want more exclusive stories where love and desire can grow without limits or censorship, check out our Patreon link, where a catalogue of delightful romances awaits you. Your support allows our stories to keep coming to life. Comment below where you're watching from and which moment moved you the most in this story. You can also support our work through a small donation on Ko-fi. The links are in the video description. And remember, true love knows no contracts. It simply happens when you least expect it, with whoever you least imagine, in the most perfect way possible, until the next story. Because here, every happy ending is just the beginning of a new journey.